Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. My name is Ruanni, and I am the editor of the book that we are launching today. Chua just asked me, "Where's the book?" And I just realized I was so excited about meeting you that I forgot all 4 copies of the book in my office. Fortunately, Mario brought his, right? So that's how it looks like. And perhaps can we just pass it around so they can look at the content just in case?
Touch and feel.
Sorry.
Touch and feel the book.
Yes, so you have to feel the book. So we really, well, this is a book launch, but when I explained to my distinguished panelists here and my friends as well how it's going to look like, I said I didn't want it to be a conventional way of launching a book, but I wanted it to be an informal conversation about the book and about the issues coming out of that particular book as well in the volume. So this is going to be really, hopefully, an informal conversation where we talk about unequal Englishes and the issues related to that as well. And at the same time also, hopefully, encourage everybody to come in and participate in the conversation as well, asking questions and also contributing to the, to the discussion as well. But so my role here is, of course, as a facilitator as well, and also, in a sense, framing the discussion. Just to give you an idea of, can we just pull the chairs here, because I'm sure the chairs here. I'm sure there's some people coming and they don't want to be here. Sorry about that. Personal and as well as theoretical or scholarly, justification as to how I actually engaged in the notion of unequal Englishes. I come from the Philippines, and not just in the Philippines, but in the context of, in Central Philippines, at a time when my place where I grew up in was kind of rural instead of urban. And so, in fact, when we were growing up, the first time that I saw an escalator and a lift was when I actually went to Manila to study in the University of the Philippines. So anyway, the reason why I mentioned that is because growing up in the province, where we didn't have access to live, we didn't have much access to, because at the time it was only via satellite, television, for example, so it was always two weeks delayed and so on and so forth. But in school, I was one of those who was subjected to an English-only policy. I guess many of us have been subjected to that, and for me, it was traumatic in the sense that there was, in that context, there was no space to actually use English conversationally, right? So being forced to speak English, growing up in, let's say, in elementary, was kind of like my first experience with inequalities of English. And when I actually moved to the University of the Philippines, and I think in some of the interviews, when Mario did talk about, interviewed me in Portsmouth recently and in some other interviews as well, I always mention this, because when my first year at the University of the Philippines, in a dormitory, I was so afraid to get out and talk to people, coming out, me being from the province, because I was so afraid that they would talk to me in English. And because of that, in the dormitory, there would always be some gathering, which I never attended. but there was someone, like a resident advisor, on each floor who would open our doors to pull us out in order for us to talk and have a meeting. To avoid that, I had to hide under my bed or inside a cabinet. All right, that's how traumatic it was for me to be forced to speak in English. And so looking back, I mean, why am I sharing this? I'm sharing this because this specific example, this specific experience of mine somehow, generates different layers of the politics of language and the politics of English. The first one, of course, would be the politics of English. And that is, I was coming into this new environment at the University of the Philippines where I felt, it was probably not real, but I just felt that speaking in English was perceived, much more highly than speaking in the vernacular. Because I myself wasn't also speaking the national language, right? In fact, my wife speaks a mother tongue, a different one from me, and so we couldn't understand each other, so we had to speak something else, right? Which is the national language. So the politics of English here in this context would be how, there is a felt and experienced linguistic hierarchy in the university, in the place where I come from, right? And that has got to do with the different languages being valued differently. On the other hand, another layer is not just the politics of English, but the politics of Englishes. Because I was coming from the province, right? I was so afraid as well that even if I would speak in English, my accent would generate negative reactions to me, right? And even until now, actually, there are some stereotypes of people who speak certain languages as their mother tongues from different provinces, and stereotypes that have been added on to the speaking of English. So my first encounter actually with Philippine English, all right, was this encounter, was this experience of Englishes. That's why when I started reading up the scholarship on Philippine English, I couldn't connect to it because it's celebratory. It celebrates a certain variety of English, but my experience wasn't really that kind of experience, because even if I felt that I was, learning English and becoming more comfortable with English, right? It was still not the kind of English that was, felt to be the privileged kind of variety, even within Philippine English, and so on and so forth. So when I started that, then it dawned on me that somehow, even with the, celebrating, a variety of English, such as Philippine English, there are still inequalities within that particular so-called outer circle community. And that's where I think I came in with, and the way I understand and understood the notion of unequal Englishes. Because then through my trajectory, the academic trajectory, I went back to the literature on world Englishes, on the pluralization of English. And I felt that a lot of the description of these different Englishes was description of educated Philippine English, educated Singapore English, for example. But with Philippine English, there are actually Philippine Englishes as well, the different varieties and different accents associated with it, which are now unequally valued. And so that's how the book in 2015 actually came out. It's called The Idea of Unequal Englishes. But for this particular book, the more recent one, it's more about providing a range of ways to engage in unequal Englishes, and what are different ways to do research on unequal Englishes. There's nothing really revolutionary in the idea. The point basically that I think is to put the role of politics and power back into the discussion of the pluralization and localization of English. Because my understanding is, my feeling is that, again, because of my experience, that has been pushed away from the discussion, from the dialogues, right? And therefore, I think we need to recenter the role of power, the role of politics in the study, not of just politics of English, but in the study of Englishes. So that's why it's the inequalities of Englishes. So that's basically the basic framework from where I think we can launch the discussion and the conversation. So I'd let Mario to continue the conversation. And again, we are invited to ask questions anytime any one of us actually continues the conversation.
Right. Thank you, Ruanni. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this event. I was really looking forward to this. And I was looking forward to this because, a little preface, I mean, I've known Ruanni I was calculating that in my head right now, 20 years.
Yeah.
So we've known each other for 20 years, and we actually met for the first time last year.
Yeah.
After 19 years of knowing each other, we finally met in Portsmouth last year. And 20 years ago, the reason why I've known Ruanni for so long is that 20 years ago, more or less, my colleague at the time, Routledge, and I put together a collection, an edited volume, on, it was called English in the World, Global Rules, Global Roles, if I remember correctly. And Ruanni was one of the contributors, and Jennifer was one of the contributors as well. I remember that. So we talked about 20 years ago. The reason why I'm saying this is because, I was reflecting, who you are is actually a collection of the people that you meet and the influences that you have, right, through your life. So who you are changes all the time. And there are certain meetings and certain encounters that mark you particularly profoundly. And I would say that that first meeting with Ruanni 20 years ago was one of those meetings, because I remember in the chapter that you wrote in that edited collection, I don't think you were actually talking about unequal Englishes yet. You weren't using that phrase. Mm-hmm. But the ideas were pretty much there, right? The idea, the fact that, the celebratory ethos of Englishes and they're all equal, etc. You were already kind of beginning to challenge that, right? And that, for me, that was the start of a critical reflection about World Englishes and what it means and in reality. So that has had a really long-lasting effect on my intellectual growth. So this is a bit of a revelation. So basically, it's been a bit of a journey. So I want to kind of tell you a little bit in a very kind of anecdotal and trivial way something about the journey. Let's call it that. So I'm going to wear very uncomfortably a hat of a World Englishes person. Okay, you all right with that? So I'm going to play the part of a World Englishes person. Well, I've written books with the title World Englishes, so I guess that's. I mean, Jennifer's done the same, and if we put a hat, the World Englishes hat on Jennifer's hat, it would be very uncomfortable as well, right? Not now, yeah, exactly. So we wear these hats just for convenience, right? Anyway, so World Englishes, the idea that I want to start with is the seduction of World Englishes, and in particular the plural, right? I'm going to go really, really trivial here. What gives me still, after so many years, a thrill of satisfaction is to see, when you type the word Englishes in your computer and it's still underlined in red. It's great.
Yeah.
It's really nice. It's a really good feeling. It makes you feel that you're a bit anti-system. You're a rebel. It's like you're miles ahead of Microsoft that still thinks that English is a mistake. So that's great. Then you add these words normally in your personal dictionary because it's annoying to see the red line. But not for this word. Right? This word, I haven't added it to my personal dictionary because I want to see the red line. It makes me feel good. And so, it's true. I've never added it to my personal dictionary. And it's very seductive. And this whole idea of diversity and equality, it's very, very attractive, right? It makes you go, yes, you nod, right, almost instinctively when you begin to hear these ideas about equality and diversity and so on, right? So I've been teaching World Englishes as well. I still teach it. So I teach World Englishes mainly at master's level. And that also is generally a pretty good experience because, I tend to get students from, let's say, I don't like this expression very much, let's say Global South, so I get students from mostly South Asia, West Africa, and other parts of the world as well, right? So these students come to the UK, they do an MA in Applied Linguistics and TESOL. They come to the UK. World Englishes is an optional module, by the way, so they choose it. The reason why they choose it, I'm sure, is because of the ES at the end of English, and they're not too sure what it means, and they kind of want to find out more. So let's choose this. But when they actually do the course, they really enjoy it, right? But what they enjoy about that is this kind of, it challenges their preconceived ideas about their own English. Right? So they come from Nigeria, they come from Pakistan, they come from India, from Ghana, from Kenya, all former British colonies. Right? They come to the UK, the centre of the empire. They come to the UK and then they learn that their English is not only fine, but it's actually on equal standing with all the other Englishes in the world. And that is great, right? And they love that. And they should love that, right? And so it's a really good experience. But then I was teaching a class yesterday, actually. It was actually yesterday, right? Yesterday. So the academic year started a few weeks ago, right? 2 weeks ago. So it's still early days. And we were having this discussion in class. We were talking about features of English, different varieties, and we were talking about the fact that English is distinctive and so on, that absorbs the cultural elements of the environments where it found itself and so on and so forth. Everybody's nodding, everybody's happy, and then about an hour in, there's this student from Pakistan, and the student from Pakistan is like, I can ask a question. So we were having a discussion, I can ask a question. Yeah, of course, ask the question. And he asked the question, he said, well, okay, fine, that's all very good. And he said, if I wanted to go and teach English in Malaysia, what would happen? That's the question they asked, exactly like that, these words, right? And that moment, that question, for him, it was Unequal Englishes suddenly appeared in front of him, right? He didn't have the words to call it that, but he had that sudden realization that already. So he was really quick. He kind of ruined it for me. It's not what do I do now for the rest of the course. But, so normally I talk about Unequal English towards the end, like in week 10 or something. And now he's already done it. He's already asked the crucial question. I'm from Pakistan. I go to Malaysia, he said. He picked Malaysia. What would happen to me? So we had to continue the discussion and steer it in a different direction. And basically we came to two kinds of conclusions, or at least 2 points in our journey, if you like. One was that it wasn't going to be particularly straightforward for him to find a job as a teacher of English in Malaysia. But still, when he said that, I remembered instantly. I was at a conference in Malaysia a few years ago, ELT and the TESOL conference, and the Ministry of Education of Malaysia was invited in that conference, so he gave a speech at the beginning. One of the things he said in the CLT conference, what he said, textual words, okay, he said, in Malaysia, we would like to invite people with blonde hair and blue eyes. He actually said these words, to come and teach us English. This is the Minister of Education, right? The Minister. So I was thinking, so when this student asked the question, those words resonated in my head, right? Anyway, so we had to have this discussion. And this, again, there was this kind of apparition of unequal Englishes in front of him. And we came to this conclusion. One, that it wasn't going to be particularly straightforward for him to find a job. The second conclusion that we were kind of getting to, that the challenge wasn't going to be about his expertise. It wasn't going to be about the way he spoke English. It wasn't going to be about his qualification. What it was going to be about was that he came from Pakistan and that he looked the way he looked. Because that's what it was, right? And again, already, which is very much from what I've understood and what I've learned within the concept of unequal Englishes, there was this huge shift from language to something other than language. Right? So the challenge that he was going to face if he really went to Malaysia, it wouldn't be impossible for him to find a job. It would definitely be difficult, right? But the challenge had nothing to do with language. Right? It would have to be about other things. And so there was that. And so for me, metaphorically, we were having all this really, really kind of idealistic discussion. We were, again, seduced by this idea of equality and everything. And then suddenly this question that kind of ruined everything. And metaphorically, for me, unequal Englishes in this kind of journey, if you like, it's almost like, when you have a really cold shower after a hangover? That's what unequal Englishes does to someone who's been talking and discussing and thinking and reflecting about world Englishes for a long time. And then suddenly, bam! Right? Cold shower. You wake up and it kind of shakes you into thinking about reality. Right? And it shakes you into thinking that fundamentally, some Englishes are more equal than others. Right? I mean, it's like, 50 years ago, world Englishes, or Braj Kachru, about 50 years ago. Am I right? Yeah, more than that. 50 years, he started this revolution. I mean, I think legitimately we can call it a revolution. He was challenging the really deep-rooted ideas about English at the time, right? Started revolution. And then what tends to happen, the revolution becomes establishment. I mean, I can't simplify, right? Revolution becomes establishment, and when it becomes establishment, you need another kick, And I think I really, really, really want to thank Ruanni and every single contributor to this volume for having done that, for having done exactly that, to continue to challenge something that had become almost institutionalized as an idea, and to kind of provide us with this beneficial, really cold shower. So thank you very much, Ruanni.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. But I mean, what happened to your Pakistani student now?
It's still there. It's still there.
All
so
right.
now, the only thing is now I need to think of how to continue the course now. Seriously, I mean, because now it's going to upset the whole schedule. Well, yeah, but...
Thank you very much. Other questions? Well, thank you for starting off with that. Actually, Mario as well, because I think Rommy here will definitely pushing it a little bit more forward. Rommy here actually put together, a group of friends or scholars from Chile for a chapter in my book, and they look at unequal Englishes through the lens of unequal personhood, which I believe really pushes this even forward. In fact, I said, I don't care, I'm not so invested in unequal Englishes, do anything you want, so do anything you want.
Correct, yes. Thank you for the invitation, Ruanni. I feel inspired now by the two of you speaking, so let me talk about my own experience coming from Chile, So in Chile, English is obligatory at schools, beginning from the 5th year of elementary school. When I was a student, many years ago, perhaps not many, I had to do French. The last years that French was obligatory at school. Then it disappeared from the curriculum. And then English. become to be compulsory. And I remember that I did well in English at school because I liked it. But I liked it because of music, because of movies, and all the influence that we had from different, media. So when I came to uni, when I decided to go to uni, I said, well, English, literature, and linguistics. I had no clue what that meant. But it sounded beautiful to me, coming from a working class background. I said, yeah, why not? So I entered uni, and I was confronted by this very rigid, normative system of learning a language, English. And suddenly, what I thought it was English to me changed drastically, because it was not the English that I listened to in songs that I liked, and the artists that I liked. It was something completely different, and I really struggled academically speaking. And then, because conditions are inherently precarious in Latin America, it's not easy, especially being a woman, important point. I decided to continue with the teacher language education program, and I became a teacher. So I reproduced everything that I had learned at uni in terms of the rigid structure, normative systems. This is what you have to learn, and even more the ideological ideas that English as a system carried out. Like, for example, the promise of English, the idea that through English, through learning English, you will become a better person, you will have access to better jobs, and all of a sudden countries will become developed, right? And the truth is, none of that happened. If it wasn't for a scholarship, I wouldn't be able to be here studying for a PhD, which I recently submitted. So yes, the story of Unequal English is very, very much truth in my context, where gender expectations clash, where class divides clash, and there's a lot of hierarchies, right? And adding to that, it's only about British English versus American English, fueled by the big publishing industry, right? So this is what we learn, and even to this day, this is what we learn. British English, pronunciation, grammar, syntax, etc., all the structures, and then American English. And due to the history of education in Chile, most of the teachers tend to prefer British English, which then clashes again with what students really like doing outside school, like watch movies, the big industry from Hollywood, American music, etc. And then we now have nowadays the big influence from K-pop, Korean music, Korean drama, where students are learning Korean by watching K-dramas, right? And there are Korean lessons as well. But again, it's something that is very different to what students really like and learn outside the institutional spaces. So this is when last year, I think it was, Ruanni asked me, do you know anyone in Latin America who would like to talk about this?
2 years ago, I think.
2 years ago?
It can't be just only 1 year, the book.
Yeah.
No, I think 3 years.
Like 2 years ago. And I was like, I can do that because I have a study group in critical sociolinguistics at the University of Chile. So we talked about it, say, yeah, we can do this. And we did a research with students and teachers that experienced these normative spaces. So yes, that's more or less my journey. If you want to know more, we can discuss it.
Right.
Or buy the book, yeah.
Well, I'm interested though, I mean, in terms of your, this idea of unequal personhood, I mean, how did you, look at it? I mean, how did you, how do you guys call it? Why did you use that
English
lens?
speakerhood.
English speakerhood, yeah, sorry about that, yes.
Yeah, well, maybe I can show you the image for those visual learners like myself. prepared like an infographic that I can send to you if you want, but it's in the book anyway. So what is English speakerhood? For us, it's a dynamic and transformative process involving the incorporation of English as a semiotic resources to our own identities, right? And it's influenced, that process is influenced by a number of factors, socio-historical, political, economic factors, and it is constructed basically on those hierarchies that I mentioned and the structural inequalities, right? And this is the idea of English speakerhood and how people feel speaking. And we concentrated on speaking because of what I said about my own experience and our participants. It's mainly it's like a formal and informal space. So our participants told us that when they were like speaking freely in communicative spaces like video games with their friends around the world, thanks to the internet, something that I didn't have in my days. I was not that, I'm not that young. They felt like they were doing something, that they knew English, that they could speak freely, and it was very positive for them. While when they had to speak English at university in these institutional regimes, they felt bad. They felt they didn't know anything, and the differences in terms of class, when they compare themselves to those who really came from a wealthy background and had more access to English, they felt really bad. They didn't know English, that they didn't know anything, basically. So English for them is, or knowing English is also a marker of good education, right? So it's all about the way they speak, and it's part of their identity.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for that, Rommy. Giuliana?
Well,
yes,
I have
thank
to
you.
wrap
Thanks
too
very
well.
much.
Okay, so this is two very hard acts to follow, so apologies. So I feel like I need to start with a personal reflection now. I hadn't prepared one.
Go.
I feel I have to now. So I come from a context where I didn't actually have to learn English so much. It wasn't forced at me, but I felt the pressure of having to know English, and actually always resented having to learn English, because I felt, in a way, this utilitarian relationship with the language, that you have to learn it because it's useful. And so I always had this very conflicting relationship with having to speak English, and I can't say I particularly enjoy using the language personally.
Even now?
Even now, I know I'm still very conflicted. I feel I feel this power of the English language over me, but at the same time, I've also come across the research. Musner inspired me to also think about English as an emancipatory tool for marginalized communities to actually use the language to speak to the world in situations where they're silenced. And so that really opened my eyes to another dimension of English, actually. So this is the personal reflection. Done. So I'm just going to ticked. So I just wanted to pick up a couple of points from. I've not written a chapter in the book, so I'm not one of the authors of the book. But I've read the book and I've picked up a couple of points, if that's okay. So the first one is about reality. And I wanted to pick up from Ruanni, from the preface that you've written. And you write that Unequal Englishes is an ideological construct. And so when we attempt to make sense of the world, we create these interpretive frames to make sense of the world. And so our descriptions of the world are always tied with our frames of interpretation. Am I right?
Yes.
That's what you wrote. Okay. So when we use this interpretive lens of unequal Englishes, then we are able to locate power and the struggles that surround the use of the English language or Englishes in the world. And so then we are able to see the different layers of inequality. So my initial question is, if we start sort of peeling this onion or these different layers, do we come to a reality? And is this reality the global capitalist system? So all these inequalities, do they have, coming to in our political economy? We have a colleague in the department, John O'Regan writes about it, David Block as well, other applied linguists, who write about English and political economy. So my question would be, what is the role of global capitalism in these inequalities that we all experience as non-native English speakers, I would say?
Yeah, I think Maria Technology need to answer that question.
Yeah, and it's also because in the first chapter, the author talks about native English as a commodity.
Yeah.
Yeah, which coming back to your example of the student not fitting in that category, obviously, it can't sell that commodity, right? In the world economy. So just, my question would be, when we look at all these different frameworks, interpretive frameworks, the final question is, are they empirical manifestations of the same underlying reality, which is the global capitalist system, and what do we do about it? As researchers of language. Do I go into the other question now? Would you have a second?
No, I mean, yeah, probably we can respond to that. Or, yeah. What do you think, Mario?
Well, I think that I really like the idea of the onion. I mean, you say, peeling the onion is a bit of a, set phrase in a way, but it's a really interesting one because your question is very pertinent because the way I'm visualizing this, go the onion, and what you have start peeling it, what you have on the surface, on the outer layers, is all this stuff about language and stuff, right? And I think the slight misconception is that we think that we need to fix the outer layers. But then you said when you start peeling it, what's in the middle? And I think I would agree with you. In the middle is global capitalism, and essentially the system of inequality that is so pervasive in the world. So what you see on the outer layers, to do with language and other things as well, the inequalities that exist linguistically, for me, are a reflection of the deeper inequalities that exist in different areas, economical inequalities, cultural, and so on. And fundamentally, yeah, you could summarize that, if you like, in terms of global capitalism. So I guess the illusion is that we fix it by fixing language issues. You don't. We can talk about that, and the two are kind of connected. But I think one of the great contributions of Unequal Englishes is this realization that we've been for too long focusing on language and forgetting the core of the onion. So fundamentally, I don't know if this is an answer, but I would agree with you. And I think as sociolinguists, we need that kind of, what's the word, humility even, to recognize the place of language. That's not the whole story. In fact, very often it's not even the story. I mean, even going back to the anecdotal thing with the Pakistani student that, we were discussing how difficult it would be for him to find a job. It's not about language, once again. So the language stuff is on the visible part of the onion, but as soon as you start peeling it, there's something else much more fundamental. So yeah, I mean, we agree with that.
I would like to add to that it's not only capitalism, though, because in Latin America we have 500 years of colonialism.
Yes.
Sure,
right?
sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, the early republics in Latin America in the 19th century, they all were born in a way already unequal. right? Categorizing, labeling people according to race, gender, class, etc. So, and then patriarchy. And you can look at, capitalism feeding from patriarchy or the other way around, or just one system. But in any case, if we think about the center of the onion, those are the three things for me.
Yeah, I would say though, because you do bring in colonialism and patriarchy, but I see them as, capitalism is patriarchal and racist and colonialist. So, I think at the core of the onion, it's a colonial project. That is inherently racist, patriarchal.
Can I just say something? I mean, I think I'd agree with what you were saying, Giuliana, but what everybody's saying really is that for me, capitalism is at the heart of all of this. But it does raise a challenge, I think, for those of us that are involved in education, because we want to recognise the pluralities that are being brought to the table. And in fact, I think we're getting better. If I look at, the amount of time that I've been involved as a teacher, I remember when I was a young teacher, we used to circle things that students wrote and write not English in the margins, when it just didn't make sense to us. I mean, I would never write not English in the margin today on something a student gave me. So I think in terms of the academy and in terms of what we're doing with our students, we have got better at valorising, if you like, the pluralities that are being brought to the table. But in fact, when then students leave the academy and go out into reality or into the real world looking for jobs, I mean, as John O'Regan was saying, he probably said that normative standard English is what is seen as the currency that's acceptable in the global marketplace. So there's a tension, I think, between, on the one hand, our concern and our desire to make people think differently about language, but actually, in a way, as what Mara said, maybe we're very focused on the outer layers of the onion, and it takes a long time for the kinds of things that maybe we're doing to impact on capitalism, which is a system of inequality to begin with. So I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, it's a paradox that's there in what we're doing and the things that we're all here interested in.
In publishing, if you publish, it's common to have a peer reviewer asking to have a native speaker.
But I think, thank you. Because I'm coming in also as a language teacher, educator, and I think, from the practical side of it, really, I think there's always this when we engage with different teachers, when you engage with different colleagues in different parts of the world, there are questions, of course, about native speakerism. There are questions of, like, for example, at some point in the Philippines, there was a beauty queen who won a crown, but who won the crown despite having, spoken in what many in the national newspaper said as horrendous English, right? It's horrendous English, and she was bashed for speaking that way, and so on and so forth, to the point that she had to relinquish the crown, right? So, I say this is because at that moment, I needed somehow an explanation. So why is it? And I said, okay, unequal Englishes, right? A way to somehow explain what's going on. But I guess unpacking unequal Englishes, and I think it's very, very, very strong. A core component of it really is to move away from the study of Englishes, and into the study of the speakers of Englishes, right? I think that's core in unequal Englishes, because of the argument that in unequal Englishes, or actually in world English, I think I've said this many times over, in world Englishes, we have been talking a lot about Englishes, but not about the world, all right? And I was bashed for that for many times, even back in the university. I didn't, some of my work didn't get through immediately because of that. But anyway, that's how I think Giuliana was is bringing us to that point essentially about describing and explaining this particular world in which these Englishes and the speakers of Englishes actually operate, and what is it like. Now, my experience with capitalism, for example, also, and I'm going to say this also because of my own work, having come from different colonialisms. All right, in the Philippines, Spanish for 333 years, the United States for about 50 years, and of course we had the Japanese as well at some point. And my experience was that there was a lot of discussion about the coloniality and the colonialism, that's associated with languages and the politics of languages. And then in more recent years, in more probably decades, the discussion has moved towards the political economy, centering, like global capitalism, right, as somehow something that galvanizes and produces and generates these inequalities. And again, coming from a highly colonized country, I felt that the colonialism part has also been erased away from this, talking about, the capitalist contribution to the capitalist generation of these inequalities. So I think my point here really is also still a matter of, location, who you are as a researcher, and whether you actually see the coloniality of things depends on, whether you have yourself even probably experienced it. Because I always felt the need, like a more recent article of mine, has something to do with native speakerism as a colonial, construct, because I felt that it has actually been, the coloniality of native speakerism, because it's actually needs to be brought back to it, right? So going back to your question, I think it's a great question to somehow, peel it all out and unpack it, right? But when we unpack it, exactly what's the configuration of these structures and conditions that can help us explain our own experiences and other people's experiences as well. Because again, to me, my experience is somehow the coloniality of things has been pushed away. I think it needs to be reconfigured alongside questions of patriarchy, of course, and capitalism.
So you have a research agenda now.
Can I also add that in the end, it becomes like a moral dilemma for educators, because in Chile, it's very stratified. The population is highly stratified. So if you go to a private, non-prestigious university, you will certainly learn English, right? And that's what I did in my research. I studied how people learned English and the discourses around it, etc., and how teachers taught English. But when I started to question what they needed English for, the reality is that less than 5% of the graduates actually need English for the job market. Because the type of jobs that they usually apply for are entry-level jobs. So my question there would be more radical. Do we really need to learn English? And then it becomes a moral dilemma for us, because we think, well, if we don't teach English, are we taking some chances from students to succeed eventually, or to learn something else? Or we need to focus on what they really need to learn to succeed in the local job market,
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. A really fascinating discussion, and I agree a lot with what you have said about the equation, the capitalism, colonialism, and also the fascinating discussion on the speaker board. I think that's all really interesting. But I feel the elephant in the room is in all the discussion. I kind of feel we need to think about who are the active sort of enforcer of all these and equalness. I tend to think they're not necessarily the CEO of successful business, but very much actually on the street, people you meet, strangers you meet, or your next door neighbors, or perhaps in the room, some people sitting here. So who are the people who actually have buy in this unequal Englishes, and who are the people who actually, because they come through, not necessarily in the jacket of CEOs with capitalism and cloning. They are very difficult to pin them down because they're nice and they said it with the best intention. For example, the advert you said, and also the beauty queen. And I think I don't really know the detail, and I sometimes I just think it may not be so-called native English speaker force this beauty queen to actually give it up. It probably because the media or people she met, in a social media platform who might be very innocent to put down those comments. So just really want to put out there the element in the room and how we can work together. To
you mean like an internalized?
Internalized by the very speaker who are the victims of the unequal English.
That's a good point.
Very good.
Yes, and
This someone at the back.
Hi, thank you for that.
thanks for coming, by the way.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to respond to the gentleman in the blue, and now I was raising my hand because somebody's really famous who said I should know. So I'm really sorry. Because I wanted to respond to the notion of the academy being better at valorizing variation.
John.
And also then what Giuliana responded to that about the notion of peer review. And then also a bit about what Ruanni said afterwards about colonialism. Because to me in recent years I've come to see World Englishes in a lot of ways, or the study of World Englishes, as a very colonial enterprise. Like it's become a sort of new colonial enterprise. How a lot of people, including how I've done it in the past, like I'm not exculpating myself at all from this criticism. And I wonder if we really are better at valorizing variation, because last year I was editing a book and we thought we were very noble and self-righteous, and we said yes, we were only going to have junior scholars. If you were a professor, as we were with the German colleague, if you were a professor, you're not allowed a chapter in our book. Like we actually just said, you can't be in our book. If you have these qualifications, you're not invited to submit. And the publisher was really nice about it, and they said, yeah, you can try that, and the book worked really well, and the people we excluded have given us really great reviews, so it's but in the process of writing, when we would go to the editor, they would be, so we said we also don't just want people at European universities. We want people from other universities. So I mean, it was an ideological stance that the production of this book took. And what eventually happened was that even though we had all these very great ideals, it would come back, oh no, but they can't say it like that. Yeah, no, but our book is about like new Englishes. Yeah, no, but they can't write it like that. And then it became, well, I need this book to be published because I need to apply for a job, and so I need it to go to press. Or I need this method that this person in St. Lucia has used to be done in line with this type of thinking, because I selfishly need this book to go to press. I need it, and so it became this really strange thing where what started as a really noble enterprise became sort of the people who had access to the ways of spreading ideas and the ways of spreading knowledge, because we had access to the ways of spreading ideas, because we had funding, like third-party funding for the projects that led to it, because we had all those other sorts of things that tell you, yes, you're doing a great job. We should have been able to say we're not going to be gatekeepers, or we're going to change the rules around it, but we didn't, because we weren't important enough in some ways, we couldn't make those changes. And so it really struck me then in the whole thing of valorizing and peer review. And then very recently, somebody asked me to write an article for something. And I think I'm an okay writer. You asked me to write it, I wrote it. And then the reviewer came, one of the reviewers, there were 3 reviewers. And the first and second were fine. And the third one said, well, this person obviously can't write English. And I said, well, you obviously can't read line numbers because the line numbers are what are written in Creole. Like if you read the line number, and I did tell the editors they should edit comments like that because it's just rude. And so I wonder how much we actually valorize that when even within the community, like the people thinking about it, we have all these things of checking who has, like checking what gets published in terms of language, in terms of what counts, in terms of how ideas are circulated. And then what you said, Ruanni, about the coloniality, we've spoken about coloniality in the past, and the idea of world English is forgetting coloniality. There's that. I think, the model disturbs me in some ways, and that's Bushman and Couch's reimagination of Schneider's model, where they say colonialism isn't important. You don't have to have colonialism to develop a post-colonial. I was like, the clue is in the name. And so, but this idea then of world English is forgetting coloniality, or the notion of colonialism having taken place, even while when I talk about world English as a colonial enterprise, people are making careers off of going. It becomes extractive in that way, yeah, because you're taking people's language and writing a book and getting a promotion. That's what is happening. And so I just was. It's not a question. It's just a sort of series of thoughts linked to all the things.
I think it's very interesting. And you made me think of. Spivak, the double bind. We live in the double bind. I've written about that myself. As someone who's critical, it's a culturalist, working in Anglophone academia. Being in this double bind where I'm critical, but I'm part of the machine that perpetuates inequality. Technical.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. And
thank you for coming too.
No, it's an honor to be here. I was just thinking about 2 notions about, the speakability that people kind of, we're talking about that English opens like doors, and I have been myself engaging with the idea that, let's look at the possibilities that come with English. And kind of in a way to dealing from the coloniality of English by looking at, so the fact that there are unequal Englishes is just there, okay, but just like, people here noted, let's look at the actors, okay, who are kind of reproducing these unequal Englishes, reminding me of actually the critique of the late Bernard Spotsky of Philipson's notion of linguistic imperialism. That, okay, so we have linguistic imperialism, we have unequal Englishes, but what about those who are reproducing these unequal Englishes?
Yeah.
So for me, it was also now important to look at the kind of the subjects of unequal Englishes and what are they doing with these unequal Englishes, with English. So in a sense, there are people who are using English to make themselves and their claims audible and, visible to other people. And thank you, Giuliana, for kind of being inspired by this idea of the emancipatory of English, but still I'm asking myself, so these people, the minoritized, okay, the oppressed, they are trying so hard to use English and to make themselves heard and seen. And they are shouting in English, but the world doesn't seem to be listening. So, and so it's just, for me also as one who has been trying to de-link from the coloniality of English, it seems that we're always stuck, okay, go back to the same point, okay, that English seems to be, colonizing the colonizers and the colonized all over again. Okay, so we are telling people, okay, no, we need English, just like you said. Maybe English opens doors. Maybe English gets you to get a scholarship, gets you, like, you know, me as a scholar, I have been able to make my voice heard through English. Or other people, other minoritized people have been trying to make their voice heard through English. But then the world is not listening. Here we have been engaging with the idea of whether we call it linguistic imperialism, whether we call it the coloniality of English, whether we call it whatever we want, okay, unequal Englishes. Still here are decade after decade after decade established scholars sitting in these, you know, established campuses and discussing the same series of kind of being trapped in the same idea. And it's just, you know, I'm just asking or just exposing what is going inside of my frustrated mind with you here. Just, you know, to wonder, maybe our studies, okay, need to be very problematic in the sense that when we write or publish an article, maybe the goal should be to disturb the reader instead of helping them. So for PhD students, instead of, you know, finding, okay, the article, okay, where they can, you know, use it to support their argument, that it will mess them even up more so that we can all try harder in our questions and in the way that we are, you know, trying to open these spaces for research about the inequality of English. So maybe I apologize, maybe my state of mind today, you know, with everything that is happening is really affecting the way I'm seeing things, but I think that we need this pessimistic view, okay, of what is happening in the field. And it is only then maybe that we can start kind of re-asking the questions, reapproaching, okay? Just we need to keep doing re-things. I don't know how, okay? But it's decades now of all of us using the same frustration with inequalities and with unequal Englishes, but still the world is not listening. They're not listening neither to the, you know, to the perfect English, to the standard English, to the English coming from the different parts of the world, and nobody is listening. So, thank you.
Thanks very much. Fascinating. Thank you. I have my own thoughts, but you first, and then you're next. Yes.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, kind of, it is a bit hard to continue. But I think I wanted to ask something about kind of taking things back to classroom and sort of referring to what you said, Mario, at the beginning, but also John and Brian also, what do we do with our students? What do we do in these classrooms? And you said, I teach world Englishes. So my question is a very practical question. I studied all these different ideological frameworks for describing the internal variation within English, so world Englishes, English as a lingua franca, and so on, international English, and so on. In a comparative context, I compared it to other sort of sociolinguistic situations with some other languages which have similar types of variation. And so my practical question, when you said I teach world Englishes, what is it that you teach? Do you teach do you teach about the spread of world Englishes, the internal variation, the unequal status, the indexing of these, different indexing of these varieties only, or do, let's say, someone like your student from Pakistan, do you teach the typology of these differences? Like, what is it that makes these Englishes different? What is the substance of the difference in language? So I'm turning kind of back to language. And also, do you teach about the inequality that Englishes produce in different socio-political, geographical contexts vis-a-vis other languages? So you started about talking about your journey and I missed. I sort of went out to pick Muzna up from the door, but I didn't hear the name of the language, your mother tongue, and I didn't hear the name of the mother tongue of your wife. So we are talking about English, 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 English all the time, and very rarely do we mention the inequality that English produces within a certain context. So that's my
Thank you.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, I think, thank you for the question. It's a really, really interesting question and reflection. I think, I can tell you what I do personally, because, the umbrella term word English is applied to different courses. I mean, very different things happen in different courses, even if that's the same name. So I tend to do, I think very much what the kind of stuff that you're talking about. For me, the main objective, the ultimate goal of the World Englishes course is, especially with the kind of students that I tend to have, is for them to develop an awareness of what's going on with English, develop an awareness about themselves. And I'd like to think that there's an element of empowering in reflecting differently on the fact, even something that may look a little bit superficial and slightly idealistic, but reflecting on the fact, actually my English is fine. And when they, going back to the onion, if you like, but if you enter a course of study and you come out on the other side with that developed conviction about yourself, it does change you as a person. And it's not going to solve the problem of inequality anywhere, but at least it creates that kind of awareness, which is always the first step towards, any form of action. I think one of the problems that sometimes we tend to have, kind of to address what you were saying as well, is that we often perhaps are a little bit too ambitious as to what a course in the classroom can actually achieve. We're not going to solve the problem of inequality. We're not going to go near it. But at least by even talking about it, and by talking about how English or languages, one of the things I talk about a lot is like the hierarchy of languages and where English sits in the hierarchy of languages. And I learn from the students. They tell me a lot of stuff that I don't know myself, and so going back to that, to this point, is that sometimes we are over ambitious about what the classroom can achieve. But if you can achieve a changed mindset, to me that's a success already. And what students do with that changed mindset, it's totally out of my control. But if they say, oh, I've now changed my ideas about English or about power and how English is related to power, that's brilliant. That's all I can say really.
Thank you. Really interesting discussions and fantastic book that I cannot wait to get my hands on. Related to everything in a way that has been coming up, and particularly the reflection on are we getting better at valorizing diversity in academia, and the idea of repeating. It's been so many years. I have recently been getting into the coloniality theory emerging from Latin American authors, which I think is definitely putting power and inequality at the center, and I find that really, really useful for me to think about English. But it also helps me think about privilege and the idea of who is privileged enough to valorize diversity, and therefore whose valorization is listened to and whose isn't. And so obviously within academic context and within higher education we have, I think, attained a level of privilege. Coming from a very unprivileged background myself, I recognize this, right? And I think, okay, how do we speak to those, and how do we interact with those, and how do we understand those that haven't attained that privilege and have to live in a world where their voices aren't heard, even if we change their minds, right? Even if talking in our courses, we change their minds and they go out there and they don't have that privilege, they don't have the tools or the status or whatever it is that has given out that privilege. And obviously within academic settings there are also hierarchies of who is listened to and who, whose valorizations of diversity are more echoed, etc. So yeah, I guess that's what I'm wrestling with, right? How do I go beyond the privilege that I have gained to break that pattern as well?
I have related questions. I'm not taking away someone else's turn, right?
No, that's okay. I think this is informal, so
again, the question is about how do I use my privilege, right? Yeah. And my question is, as they say that when you raise the critique, it's important to raise because we don't normalize hegemonies. How do we then change the world using the privileges we have? So I'm not from the critical English field. I'm coming from a very different field, so excuse me for my ignorance. So what practical steps can be taken? Because it's the institutions that hold standard Englishes, right, or standard English. What can we do about the assessment, the journals that uphold the colonial racial stratification of voices that are legitimate? What can we do as academics?
Yeah, great question.
Is the question.
Great question. No, because before I turn to the others. No, because I have also been actually, thank you for raising this also, Musna, and everybody. Because this is something, my friends here and colleagues I've talked to have always been also raising this similar concern. Just to bring it down more specifically, just to probably, unpack all of this as far as my experience is concerned. I recently edited a special issue for a journal in the UAE, and the reason why on Unequal Englishes, and the reason why I accepted that offer is because they said that all our articles would be translated into Arabic, and therefore it would open up to a wider, community of readers and scholars as well. But that, so they will take care of everything and so on and so forth. But that journal is free access, right? In other words, non-tier, and so on and so forth. But in recent years, I have actually been submitting papers in free access journals, all right? Because I felt that I had the privilege to, somehow devote some of my time to free access journals, which are not considered top tier in my field, right? Probably I had my own reasons for, there are other reasons for, like for example, making my work more accessible to other people, because it's always problematic to even talk about my article, which is open access, because open access, even if it's accessible to everybody, the institution also paid so much money for it anyway, right? But so free access to me is really the way to go in terms of, democratizing, at least, to some extent, knowledge production, especially, for example, in the field of, unequal Englishes. And so, being, someone who know a lot of colleagues in different parts of the world about, talking about inequities in knowledge production, about access to, knowledge, and so on and so forth, about, the importance of being read as well, and the conversation to be put forward, in different new communities. So I excitedly sent emails and invitations, to really quite a number of fantastic professors who we know in social media, who are writing about the colonial work and so on and so forth. All right. To cut the story short, none of them said yes. All right. None of them said yes. The special issue is up there. Fantastic. Brilliant articles. But these are the ones who felt that the spirit of the special issue was something that they were going for. never mind if my article is not top tier. Never mind if my university, doesn't recognize it as, having an impact factor. I feel like this is my work, and it's going to be accessible. It's going to be read by a new set of readers. I think going back to the question, because to everyone's point, I'm saying this because I think, to me, it's one thing to be talking about inequalities and letting people also know about these inequalities, but the question to me is, how much of our privilege are we willing to let go?
What are we willing to give up?
What are we willing to give up? Because if we are not even willing to give up a space for potentially free access knowledge produced, free access articles, we might not be able to even let go of other, even more serious privileges, right? And to me, that was an eye opener, all right? Because I thought we all are in this together, but no. So it's like, to me, and I think my friends, this is what I usually describe it. It's like, all right, this is me, a decolonial scholar. Let's do all of these things. Let's change the world. Now, do it.
Yeah.
So it's like, let me get out of it and do it. So I think I know that many, the conditions that we are all in. It doesn't mean that all of my articles are free access. I need a little bit of this and that. But I guess to me is, you had that opportunity to showcase your decolonial work. Why didn't you? Because I was, they actually wrote back. Some of them wrote back and said, because my university does not recognize it.
Yeah.
So these, I think, what I mean. I think the question is, how much are we willing to give up, and how much privilege are we willing to lose along the way?
Yeah. Can I just add something to that? Because I think you were telling me the story some time ago, and it's quite an eye opener. At the same time, the question of how much are we willing to give up, to some extent, also depends on how much we already have.
Yeah, of course. Yes, that's right.
And so, like the example of, if you're a young scholar, we are part of this really cynical system that imposes certain things in very, very rigid ways. And it really is, I needed to get this published.
Yeah.
And I needed it. There's no escape, right? And you're trapped. And so but then, you're also saying, presumably you approach some, senior people and so on. So I think we tend to be sucked in this system. And the mentality is such, it's so ingrained and deep-rooted that I'm not going to do that for a journal that's not indexed or whatever, because I can utilize that time to do an article for this other journal, right? We're pressed for time, we're pressed for everything, with promotions, so on, the metrics and the numbers, everything counts, it's a pretty, cruel, vicious kind of system.
Can I add to that? So the question I wanted to ask is, it's not about tinkering within the same system.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? How do we fundamentally change the system?
Yeah.
So it's how do we go to that space of decolonizing where we fundamentally change the system, and I completely agree with you that if you're a young scholar, you don't have those privileges, but what if you're an established scholar? So what are you willing to do to change the system fundamentally?
Yeah.
I'm going to say something controversial. First, I think we're doomed. Second, well, that's a reality.
Everyone agrees it's not controversial.
But perhaps this is more controversial. I think we live in the illusion that we can actually do something. And if you want to change the university, it's not the place. And scholarship is not the place. Because if you think about it, the university now is a business. it's been subsumed by capitalism. Publications, I mean, it all works with, I mean, look at the absurdity of it. We need to publish so we can compete against others and be in rankings. The journals need to compete to be in rankings. And then the publishing houses who actually own the journals don't pay anything, so they'll get all the money. Look at the absurd, all the labor involved that is being done for free, and then some of them, so a small amount of people actually benefit from. It's absurd. So, and also the language that we use to tell our stories, that tell our research, is not comprehensible for many of the people outside. And even sorry, and with this I finish. And even in the very same places that we're speaking, the universities, you have cleaning service that do not speak a word of English, and their rights are being abused, and they suffer from a lot of different things in the university. And in my particular institution, #1 in education for 10 years in a row.
11 years.
Where's education? 11 years, sorry, 11 years. Where's education?
No, great point.
So I'm going to ask a really naive question, and you are allowed to laugh as a response, okay? So I agree with you, okay? So I agree with you. But what would you say to somebody who said, hey, what about the impact agenda? You know, like this talk about impact and research. Impact supposedly addresses at least some of the stuff that you're talking about, right? So, you know, within the university we can't solve anything, right? The university as an institution, it's not the place where you solve things. By impact, at least in theory, is that when we go out there, we go outside the university, engage with organizations and people
so
out there.
that's what you mean by impact, not impact factor.
No, exactly. But I mean, even what I kind of wanted to say, going back to the doom and gloom, is that the impact agenda has also been subsumed within a system that is what it is, right? So almost like, is there any hope?
Even if DEI work is being subsumed.
I feel like I've heard a few things mentioned and now I'm going to put them together. Can you talk about young scholars earlier? So I'm 3 years away from finishing my PhD.
Sorry, we can't hear you here.
Oh, sorry. I'm a few years away from finishing my PhD, and I'm an assistant professor at a reasonably established university, but it's crumbling. Everyone's getting fired or being made redundant. And half the people that I got into this career with have moved into other careers, and I'm under no illusions. I don't think this is going to take me to pensioning. So I don't necessarily see it as doom and gloom, because I'm not expecting to be in the academy forever. And the idea of outreach is not like, oh, this would be a cool thing to do, a way to apply the work. It's why I got into this and how I'm going to get out of this as well. And I see, working with boy bands as an example of how you change somebody's everyday reality, not from a place of I understand something that you don't, but from a place of recognising that this work is not really, I don't want to tell you what the work that you do isn't about. When I'm looking at language and inequality, I'm thinking the value of what I can produce is not really about language, it's about an equal personhood, right? We're talking about speakerhood, personhood, and the idea that we can interpret, or we can see inequality into inequality, this very complex issue, by using language as the way in, and then looking through the surface, in the onion, or whatever you want to call it. So I think that's the answer to the question of how to not go and do the same thing again, and what is the practical value. But I wondered, for the three of you who have written the book, what do you hope to see in your lifetime, in your career time, in terms of actual change? And you can answer idealistically, because I think that's sometimes more fun than answering practically. What is it that you hope to see in terms of actual change in your everyday that will tell us that we're getting somewhere, even if it's not there?
I hope to see solidarity, because that's what we need. But solidarity among different groups. And actually, I think that's the end goal at this point, to create solidarity, and that's something that we don't have.
Can I didn't contribute to the book, but I want to answer. But I want to add up here to solidarity and activism. I think academics can be activists and practice solidarity.
Yeah, I just want to add to the debate about like where do we take this further. So when I was doing my PhD, I graduated with a PhD on the perspective of global Englishes in relation to international communication. During that period, I was working in hospitality in a restaurant to earn income and finish my PhD. And I have seen all problems with people having the confidence of the job. For example, like one of my colleagues was about to become a manager in that restaurant, and he couldn't because he was told that he needs to work more on his English. And when I was serving in the restaurant, I had these academic questions coming to my mind, like, I've learned all of these nice things during my PhD. We teach them in the TESOL programs, we teach them to applied linguistics, but I think there are more interesting places and more serious problems outside academia. It's just like, I think we should look for more places where this could have an impact, like, widening access, participation, raising awareness. We have to look at possibilities of like wide, doing research.
Thank you.
David? I just wonder if we could also circle back to the onion metaphor, which I find really powerful. And I just wondered, I definitely see how unequal Englishes can become grounds for inclusion or exclusion, but I also wonder if there are other factors at play, because sometimes, let's just say in clinical, professional communication, you have clinicians who speak a less privileged version of English or English, and but they're actually very friendly. They have that, and they're very engaging, and the patients all love them. But sometimes you also hear patients say, "Oh, I just hate that Australian doctor. He's so rude, all this and that." So sometimes what really brings people together or make you like someone, it could be their English, but it could also be other non-English factors, such as maybe sometimes it's actually unequal beliefs or unequal values or even just unequal practices. Because you see the way they or even unequal personalities, so there's so many other factors.
Sure. Thank you.
I'm very interested in the way this conversation is now heading towards the question of what use are academics. Speaking of non-academic, we both work with the British Council. I'm going to float something slightly. We have, for the English Language Teaching Research Awards, which we resuscitated last year for COVID. Monday morning, if you're on the BAL mailing list, you should get an email about next year's. But the theme is empowerment. And we've got quite a long list of different aspects of that people might have to consider. But the emphasis is on, it's going out to academics, but the emphasis is on research that includes interventions in places where essentially people need help through language. Now, that's still limited, but I think it's an interesting example. We as funders are in a position to do something in terms of helping academics engage with the real world that we're bringing up there. Only to an extent, but it's on its small steps. But it is something. I'm pleased to keep an eye on you involved. It's the BAL mailing list.
All right. Well, I have something to say, and I hope it's not the final statement, because there's still some wine there. And actually, Giuliana, I know you have more questions. So
No.
But thank you. But anyway, one thing that I'll probably just wrap it up. It's such a fascinating conversation, and I think we really need more of this kind of conversation. And I think one thing that for me, a takeaway from, but also something that I have also been reflecting on, is because I've recently read work on, not in applied linguistics, not in social linguistics, but in other fields, talking about knowledge produced in the field. All right, the argument being that so much has been talked about in terms of knowledge production, but very little on knowledge use. Right? And I think to me fundamentally is one of the core, challenges, in the whole scholarly enterprise. All right, but I also would like to push it even a little bit more forward, right? In the sense that why is it that we have to think of knowledge production on the one hand and knowledge use on the other hand? Perhaps there's really something in the way we frame our own scholarship in such a way that let's not think about knowledge use first. Let's just produce knowledge. And then because of these demands, then let's try to think about, okay, how now can this be useful in the communities? Without necessarily thinking about the fact that perhaps the starting point of research in the first place is working with communities, working with different, groups of people, so that that kind of research already addresses certain tangible, specific issues that might, of course, in the end also have theoretical implications, right? Why is it that there is a need, in other words, to conceptually differentiate between knowledge production and knowledge use, when in fact, the way we produce knowledge should be about already, using it, or, and so on and so forth. So, I hope, we have more questions, I'm sure, right, than answers, but really thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions and also for coming. We still have some time here, I think, and I'm happy to talk to everybody. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.